I don't know if I did thrive with it, to be honest. I considered giving up at one point. Like, I remember being on stage in Brisbane, and I remember doing crowd work, and I remember my brain looking at the exit sign going, just get off, just run now. Like, and I remember thinking, isn't that amazing? You can do crowd work and have a panic attack at the same time. Isn't the brain fascinating?
Welcome to the Funny in Failure podcast, a podcast that celebrates failure and shines the light on the emotional side of comedy, with yours truly, Michael Kahan.
Today's guest is empathetic, compassionate, insightful, with all-round good vibes, Felicity Ward, but you probably know this because of the title. Felicity is spectacular, she's open, deep, and funny. I love how she talks about her emotions and what's helped her in the process. I strongly believe that this is how we move forward together and have a good time doing so. Anyway, let's get into it. Felicity Ward is a multi-award-winning comedian, actor, and writer. She has toured her award-winning sellout shows worldwide, winning the hearts of audiences and critics everywhere she performs. She's coming to Australia for her first national tour in more than 5 years. So before you see her as the new David Brent in the Aussie remake of The Office this year, Felicity's returning to her first love, stand-up comedy. In her first tour since being nominated for the biggest award in live comedy at the Edinburgh Fringe. Felicity has appeared on everything, including Spicks and Specks, the Ronnie John's Half Hour, Good News Week, Talking About Your Generation, Thank God You're Here, The Librarians, The Project, and Ronnie Chieng's International Student, along with multiple appearances on the Melbourne International Comedy Festival Oxfam Gala and the Melbourne International Comedy Festival Comedy All-Stars. She's also appeared in Wakefield, The Inbetweeners, Movie 2, and Any Questions for Ben. She's also been a regular face on many other international TV shows, including Russell Howard's Good News, Alan Davies' As Yet Untitled, The John Bishop Show, Mock the Week, Gotham Comedy, Make You Laugh Out Loud, Sam Delaney's New Thing, and Access All Areas. She also has her very own Amazon Prime stand-up comedy special, and she's also heard on The Guilty Feminist. If you're in Australia, her new show, I'm Exhausting, is now out, so check it out. So as you can imagine, we dive deep and we cover a lot, and we chat about her unique outlook on life and unique start to stand-up comedy, auditioning and getting on The Office Australia, nerves and panic attacks, almost quitting, UK vs Australia, her fork in the road moment, life-changing helpers, having fun, her new shows, plus plenty more. Before we get into this chat, in case you aren't aware, the videos are now available on YouTube under Michael Kahan. That's Kahan with a K, unless you're listening to it already. I'll still be posting snippets of these chats on Instagram under Funny in Failure, so check them out if you want to stay in the loop for upcoming episodes, or you want to ask a guest a question. I'd also love it if you would share the podcast or share your takeaways from the chat. It really motivates me, helps the podcast grow, and ensures I can lock in amazing guests like this one. And just as a final reminder, the podcast comes out every Monday at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, with the video to follow the following day. Anyway, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's epic episode. My future brother-in-law lives in UK, and now that you're back in Australia, I'd love to know, what have you missed from Australia besides obviously a tan and the sun and all of that stuff?
Everything. The longer I'm there, the more I miss Australia.
Oh.
I went down the beach yesterday morning. I started speaking to a fisherman, that's just classic coasty chat.
Oh,
you
really?
speak to a stranger, you talk about the tides, you talk about the wind direction. He stopped me from going in the water because there was a stingray. And then I went, oh, well, I might just go over here because I still want to get wet. And then another massive stingray came. I'm like, all right, not having a swim. He also said the most beautiful coasty thing. We both grew up here, and we were talking about how beautiful it was. He goes, yeah, this guy asked me, you know, how you get to Edinburgh Beach. And I said, mate, you just put paradise in Google Maps. And I'm like, oh, you're a real person.
That kind of reminds me of like, because I never grew up on the coast and I don't know the colloquial terms. It's like when you're in an Uber. So how's the day been going, mate? Is it like similar but more uplifting and for your soul when you have these proper conversations?
Yeah, just talk to me about the tides. Talk to me about wind direction. It's all. I mean, I just love it. I absolutely love the weather chat. It's good.
Oh, you like the weather chat?
Love it.
I feel like what about the weather chat in the UK? Because that
Love
is
it.
just really.
Love it.
Tell me, because when I went there, I didn't see the sun. Like at 4 o'clock, I was like, what is happening to me? I didn't know that I could get more pale. I somehow reverted to a ghost.
So this will not surprise you, but a study came out last week that the UK is the second saddest country in the world. I know that the UK is a kingdom, not a country, but as a whole, the second most miserable country according to the people. And that does not surprise me in the least. It is a hard, hard place to live.
Many questions. What's the saddest?
Oh, I think it's Uzbekistan, which I'm like, yeah, you know, they might have more reason apart from just being miserable people.
I feel like there's at least 100 countries off the top of my head that should be, inverted commas, more miserable than the UK. Don't understand why everyone goes there. I understand career-wise can be quite fruitful. Is that one of the main reasons why you left?
It's the only reason I went over. It's the only reason I went over. I wanted to get better. I still think that they have the best comedy scene in the world.
World?
Yeah, I think live stand-up, like lots of people would argue that it's New York, but I think you get paid more frequently in London. So you could do 12 gigs in a night in New York, which is amazing. Yeah. You could probably do like 8 in London on a Saturday night, but you can get paid for most of them in London.
Oh, interesting.
New York, you do pro bono work for a lot longer in the States.
Many questions. What's the most shows you've ever done in one day or a 24-hour time span?
Oh, I don't know. It's probably during Edinburgh, and it might be 5.
How do you mentally cope with doing that many shows?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be 5 one-hour shows. It would be like my show would be an hour. It might be a weekend where I do an extra show if it's gone well.
Yep.
There'll be a midday show where you just like do a 20-minute spot or what have you, or a 10-minute spot, and it's like a showcase and it helps sell your show. And then there might be a radio stand-up spot or an interview in the afternoon. And then there might be a late show with the Edinburgh Fringe as well. You don't really think about how you get through it in Edinburgh. You just put your head down, hold your breath and pray.
I've heard Edinburgh's the toughest comedy circuit, if that's the right saying, in the entire world. It makes or breaks. It destroys. Yeah. We've had top class comedians, and the very few. Actually, I spoke to Colin Lane, if you know him. He won the Perrier Award, but he's like the only person I know that's had like and even then, there was still so many struggles with being in Edinburgh.
It's brutal. It's incredible. And like I remember after the first year, I had so many people go, God, you had such a good year, didn't you, at Fringe? I'm like, did I? It felt terrible. It felt so bad. And then the following year I had like, I'm never going back to Edinburgh again.
Yep. Very normal.
And then I've really had brutal Edinburghs. And then the last one I did was 6 years ago. And that was brilliant. I enjoyed all but 3 shows out of 26 shows, which is really rare. And I got nominated and I just had the time of my life. And I'm like, maybe I'll never do it again now.
Yeah, that's for the right reasons, not from. Isn't that crazy? Because there's always a bit of like this love-hate relationship with Edinburgh. By the way, like 26 shows out of 29, I've already forgot the number. That is fantastic. But it is crazy there. I know like you'd built up probably your audience by then, but being in Edinburgh is still foreign. So many people talk about selling the flyers, and then from selling the flyers, running to their shows, trying to do so many different shows. You talked about other stuff. Just mentally, how do you play and have fun in that space when there's so much happening and for a long time as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that's kind of the question about everyone's life in comedy. How do you keep playing every single time, inside or outside of Edinburgh when it comes to stand-up? And what I have found out is that having fun is more important than making the audience laugh.
Oh, I love this.
And also, this is my old lady time comedy anecdote that I tell young comics that are having anxiety, because I had years where I was having panic attacks on stage, and that was like, they were awful years. Since then, since I had a baby and went on a mild antidepressant, I do not get anxiety anymore. My depression, absolutely, but my anxiety is gone, which is amazing. I think that I would probably prefer depression, if I'm honest. If I did it, anxiety lives in your body, and you can't. Weirdly, sometimes stand-up was the only reason I'd leave the house when I was depressed. It would, I'm from a working class family, so you have to go to work. You can never not do work.
Yeah.
So it would get me out of the house. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my value. It's my contribution. And also, sometimes the endorphin kick of performing would take me out of my depression for a little while. Whereas when you're feeling anxious before you go on stage, you're trying to calm yourself down. And that's a really hard thing to do, to self-regulate before you walk out into a room full of strangers and tell jokes that you hope they think is funny. There's so much risk in it already. And I think that anxiety is like adding, fuel to the fire.
Very interesting take. I know you mentioned the panic attacks, but because you've been doing this for so long and thriving for so long, you would think from the outside, after doing the research, I figured out how you've been able to manage it. Can you hear that? Someone's singing.
No.
Oh, well, it doesn't. No. Someone's playing the piano and I'm like, oh, no. Anyway, hopefully it doesn't pick up. How you've been able to manage your nerves, because when I've seen you on stage, or whether it's on all the clips or the Gala or all the billion other things, or on TV, you always come across as really confident.
Yeah, there was years that I wasn't. Also, the years that I was having anxiety, I don't think I did a lot of telly in that time. Thank God. Certainly not when I was at my worst. I don't know. I think that there's so much of performing that's masking anyway. That people get nervous whether they've got an anxiety disorder or not doing stand-up. There's people that have been in the game for 30 years that still get a bit nervous before they go on. And you figure out how to handle that on stage, I think, only by practice. It's not, I don't know if anyone else can tell you how you will cope.
Everyone's individual.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, so my old lady comedy anecdote is, I know some people that knew Shane Warne, and the cricketer. I know it doesn't sound like it's going to be relevant.
He's actually had some really clever insights.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So he said to them that his only job when he went out on the field was to have fun. And he's so to put it in context, it wasn't to get wickets, it wasn't to get runs, it was to have fun. And what he would do sometimes is each ball would be a performance. So before he ran up, it would be like he'd move the slips around and then move them back to exactly the same spot. But it was all about fun. It was all about a performance. And I was thinking, stand up, it's very fun. Usually comes from confidence, and it's very hard to synthesize confidence. That's really, really hard. And if we could synthesize confidence, then all of us would be incredible stand-ups. You can do it on the odd occasion. You can just pretend. I remember actually after gigging with Tom Gleeson for a week in Singapore, he was so good. He's just such a pro. This is like 13 years ago. Actually, it was while I was going through my anxiety stuff. I remember being in Adelaide and saying, just put on your Tom Gleeson hat. Just assume you're going to be great. And it worked once, which was... Oh, hang on. I've just got to let my sister's dog out so she can go and see. There you go. Okay, guys. Yeah, so the confidence thing works occasionally. But going back to the Shane Warne thing, I figured out I can't synthesize fun, but what I can do is remember the last time I absolutely pissed myself laughing with my friends.
Ah, interesting.
And what that does is, if you think about the last time you were like helpless with laughter, it immediately sort of creates that oxytocin, whatever the feeling is.
It changes something chemically within us, and it gets us from low to high.
That works for everyone. Like that's a human reaction where you go, well, you know, for most people, I'm sure there's some people that are neurodivergent that don't have the same experience, or, you know, or other mental health issues. But for a lot of people, you go, oh, remember that time that I did so-and-so, and immediately your face changes, you start smiling. And so you can synthesize the memory of enjoying yourself. And I think that takes down the cortisol levels of your anxiety. So if you can try and hold that hold that feeling before I go on stage, rather than going, right, you've got to make them laugh, you've got to be funny and putting all this pressure on.
Yeah.
Actually remembering something completely unrelated.
Well, they say, and I kind of flow with this, but from like a manifesting point of view, you need to feel the emotions of what you're trying to achieve. So if you can like see it and feel it, then hopefully you can achieve it. So I think it's like brilliant for anything. It doesn't need to just be a stand-up. It's like great advice, life advice to kind of like switch something, whether we're going into a meeting or a first date or whatever it is to,
it takes you out of yourself.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so you hear this wonderful advice from Shane Warne. Is it something that you are very conscious of and you try to bring in every single show, and how you kind of like live your life, or from a stand-up perspective?
Mostly just from a stand-up perspective, actually. I started doing it about 2 years ago, and then I've kind of, oh God, this feels like such a dangerous thing to say out loud. I haven't had a lot of bad gigs for a long time.
Well done.
Yes, it feels very nerve-wracking to say that on a podcast, though, because it feels like you're going,
are you superstitious?
You've had, I don't know if I am superstitious, but that feels like bold. That feels bold to record it.
No, I think that's amazing that you've got into a place where you feel confident in your skin and you put in the work and you're hilarious. I think that's great. It's hard to say that out loud. Yeah,
I feel what I do know is that I love stand-up more probably than when I started.
Ooh.
I love stand-up so much now. I mean the gigs, not just the TV opportunities that come with it, not the people that you meet, although that is a real upside of being a comedian is how funny your friends are.
Yeah.
But I love my job, and I can't believe that I get to do it for a living still, and more so now.
I love this. It's contagious because I can go to so many different tangents. I want to talk about how you got into stand-up, because it is quite a unique story. But there are not many. This is why I love doing the podcast as well. There are very few people I've met in my life that love their job, and it's not a criticism towards people. Everyone's got their own journey. I used to be an accountant. I despised it. So I'm on the path towards fulfillment, happiness, abundance, 20,000 other words that aren't springing to mind. And for me, and everyone can live their own life, we deserve to work a job where we can actually feel joy, or at least joy more than the negatives.
I was a waitress for lots of years, and there was lots of parts of waitressing that I really, really loved. What I will say is that I think when I first started doing stand-up, I was probably a lot more cocky than I am now. Whereas, you know, like the difference between arrogance and confidence, arrogance comes from insecurity and confidence comes from security, like emotional security or insecurity. And I think in the beginning, I didn't start stand-up till I was 27, something like that, I think. It was like, that's late for stand-up.
I like how I'm saying yeah.
You probably know.
I know more about you than you.
You probably do. But there was a part of me that I got a lot of exposure very early on. And then, so I thought I deserved things maybe a bit more than I do now. Now I feel like I've earned it.
Oh,
you know
interesting.
I mean?
Yeah.
The difference between deserving something and earning something.
It's also interesting because as a young lady, young human, when we're starting out something and we're getting like applause, I wouldn't say corrupt, that's not the right word, but ego-wise, it will impact the best, everyone, single person doing stand-up because you're not used to it. And so some people don't get out of that. And that's where it gets scary, where like, I'm not saying this as you, like, where I'm the best, I'm the funniest, all of that, which you probably came up in your mind. It's come up with every other person. But then to have that kind of maturity to realize, you know what, like, I am actually good at what I do, but I'm still an equal human to the rest of us. I feel like that's a beautiful shift when people have it.
Yeah. I think that I got really humbled by the anxiety disorder, and I also moved to the UK, and that was, humbling isn't the word, just taken to my knees because I had to start again. And I'd been doing Edinburgh for a couple of years by the time I moved over there, but then people that were booking clubs thought I was an Edinburgh and a festival comic, that I just sort of did story shows. And I'm like, no, I've been a stand-up. And they're like, eh. And there was a couple of people that gave me a break so I could play the clubs, and, you know, you that's where you get paid.
Yep.
And then over the next couple of years, I became more of a club comic, and I was still doing like story-ish festival shows. But both are really, really valuable skills. Clubs in particular, I think that people, you know, I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but people sort of look down on club comics. I'm like, if you
the other way around.
Yeah, right. In the UK, there's, you know, festival comics can be a little bit snobby because they're doing something, you know, because festival comics are doing something interesting. And not all of them. I don't mean all of them, because there's lots of club comics who do great shows, and they do sort of story shows. I don't know if I'm explaining it properly. What I mean is sometimes when people gig a lot, there is a little bit of looking down upon that.
The advice that I've received from so many different comics over the years, the goal is to gig as much as you can while still having fun and enjoying it, so you improve. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's like different like trains of thought where people like, if you don't gig more than 4 times, you're not a comedian, and that's another can of worms. But to me, trying something as much as you can where it works for you is the ultimate goal, because then you get better at it. Obviously, there's other stuff that come in your life. So it seems like a mentality to stop people from growing, from what I'm hearing. I know it might not be a deliberate thing, but
it's more that if you're doing, you know, like the inference is, if you're doing clubs, then you're just doing broad humour to make the general public laugh, rather than trying something experimental or new or groundbreaking. And I suppose that's where maybe a little bit of tension comes between those two camps. And there's the wonderful thing about the UK is there's loads of people in both camps, and in individually those camps, and then there's people who are in both camps as well who cross.
Oh, nice. It was kind of like the divide. There used to be a divide here apparently between improvisers and stand-up.
Yes.
I'm like, why? It's like work together. This is how you change the world. It happens in all, like, it might be like chartered accountants versus like, I don't know, like bookkeepers. If improvisers and it's a lot better here, but if improvisers and stand-ups work together, the comedy would improve and everyone would stop have this, like, it reminds me of like Mean Girls. Like this is how you and me save the planet. We stop the divide simply from improvisers and stand-ups and different types of stand-ups, and we all grow our consciousness together.
Are you in Sydney?
Melbourne.
Oh, okay. Because that's interesting, because when I moved to Melbourne, I found there was much less of a divide than there was in Sydney, for example, between improvisers, comic actors. I think
it's gotten it's when I heard this was at least 10 years old, about how like they wouldn't even talk to each other.
Yeah, right.
You're all trying to do
feel like that with Sydney and Melbourne. I remember when we first went down to Melbourne, this is wild. I'm going to say 2004, we did a sketch show. We were flyering outside the town hall. We're telling people about our show. And they're like, this is so great. They're like, where are you guys from? They're like, oh, we're from Sydney. They handed our flyer back and said, we don't see people from Sydney. Like, openly wouldn't see our show because we're from Sydney. What kind of self-interested madness is that?
Can you imagine if they inserted any like race or ethnicity? Or to me, it's the same thing. You're
Yeah.
discriminating someone based on where they live.
Isn't that wild?
Well, how do you respond to something like that? Because it's so like unheard of. Unusual is probably a polite way of saying it, but how
Yeah.
do you respond to? I don't think I would have anything witty to say.
Oh no,
Well-
I didn't. I don't know how many weeks into the festival it was, but we're all working hard and flying every night. You sort of just go, "Whoa, that was awful." Okay, still got to sell tickets. Hey, how you going? Where you?
You should have got a photo to remember and like plan it as
Yeah.
with all your awards.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild. You've said many brilliant points. I want to go back to, because I know you also, from what I've seen, you have done crowd work and you like speak to the audience at times. And then you talk about nerves and the previous panic attack. It's still remarkable kind of how well you work and how the brain works, in that you can still have those conversations while like internal dialogue's happening. How did you, I can see for the people not watching, you're shaking your head.
Mm.
What were some of the things that you did to overcome it or become, I'm not sure what the right word is, but how to kind of thrive with it?
I don't know if I did thrive with it, to be honest. I considered giving up at one point. Like, I remember being on stage in Brisbane, and I remember doing crowd work, and I remember my brain looking at the exit sign going, just get off, just run now. And I remember thinking, isn't that amazing? You could do crowd work and have a panic attack at the same time.
the small
the brain
wins.
fascinating. Yeah. I was even able to step back. So it was like a third perspective.
Yeah, astral projecting. And
Yeah, that's right.
Different light. Yeah.
There was the conversation happening with the person in the crowd, the conversation happening in my head, and then the conversation of me reflecting of how fascinating the brain is.
So do you know what you did? Because I know you're quite a spiritual person, as am I. And I know that you've done a few things. You've meditated. I think you say a prayer, which works for you as well. And I think at different times you said you've eaten well and you've tried different things, therapy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a combination? What was kind of the switch? Because you operate differently now.
Yes, something was actually it was a really practical choice that changed things. I was with my then boyfriend, now husband, and he said to me one day, "You work 6 days a week, you have Sundays off, and on Sunday I just bring you cups of tea in bed, and this is not a relationship, and I really need you to look at how much you're working." And it was really scary, but I also really wanted the relationship. And so I made a decision that I would not gig more than 3 nights a week, and or 4 on special occasions. And I was really nervous because I was self-employed, and I ended up, this sounds like a pyramid scheme, but I ended up making 25% more money from doing live gigs the following year when I was doing less gigs, because I was only doing gigs that I loved or gigs that paid well.
That is genius. And I want to build up the mindset. It reminds me, and you're also an actor. From a purely an acting point of view, people are terrified about not working because they're afraid they're never going to work again. Comedians as well, because you're self-employed. I'm sure you've had the mentality at times, this could be the last joke I've ever said. And so it's very scary when you're your own employer. You're the one that's empowering yourself to get the next job. Yes, you might have managers in the team. And so obviously, like, you love this guy where you're like, you know what, this actually outweighs not working so much. But then on top of that, to have, which is genius, work smarter, not harder. It's so, I don't even have the words to explain this. Picking what works for you. So you pick the best bits and you're like, you know what, I don't like that club that I used to work at. I don't need to do that. I'm going to do what I like. And
I didn't know it was going to work. I really didn't know it was going to work. I was really, really scared. And also, that's something that would work in London, whereas here I don't think I could gig 3 nights a week every week in Australia. You know, I can gig 7 nights a week, 3 times a night in London if I wanted to.
That's why you moved.
Yeah, that's why I moved. I could gig, not just in London but all over the UK.
Yeah.
So it was like an appropriate move for where I was living.
And the relationship with UK compared to Australia, you mentioned that you would potentially move back, but are you, besides the sun and all the other stuff we said, do you enjoy living in the UK?
No, I don't.
I feel like you have to. You wouldn't have been able to be there for so long.
No, I love the comedy scene. I love the comedy scene. I love the culture. I love how frequently you can see music, art, dance, anything that you want that's culturally inspiring. There are so many things happening all the time. You can't be bored. All you need to do is Google and you can go and see something. Not to say that I do, but I
it's
can.
there. You feel it.
Yeah. And I still go and see some stuff, of course. I probably see bands more than anything. Sadly, I had to sell my Pixies tickets because I was on tour in Australia.
Oh, well,
very sad. Thank you. So I love that. And I love the friends that I've made there. But something that COVID made really clear is once you take culture and friends away, I'm like, oh, this is not a good place to live. And I've got a kid now, and I come back home and I sit on the beach at 7 a.m. and have one of the best coffees of my life. And I look at pelicans and I look at stingrays and I feel peaceful and happy, and the air is clear and the water is clear and people say hello to you. And I have never... I went to London when I was 19 for the first time. And I went there for a month. It was like the first trip I'd ever taken by myself.
Oh, nice.
I met up with my friend who was traveling around the world, and we spent a week in London together and then a week in Europe together. I went to Glastonbury by myself, and I just remember being in London going, why do people come here? It's so mean. People are so mean. They're so very judgmental and cold at the same time.
And
like I won't make eye contact, but I will judge your outfit with my eyes.
So is Australia is a move coming up?
I don't know. I don't think so, because my son is English and we are very close with my in-laws. I love them. I love my in-laws.
Also rare. Are you just saying that like enough times to believe? Because
no,
I actually do, but you and me are also a rare breed. Where you're shaking it, yeah.
I love my mother-in-law is an angel that walks this earth. I do not know how I'd get through anything without her. I just love her so much.
Good for you. That is amazing. So hopefully the whole fam can come to Australia, and that's the goal. So actually, maybe we should build a bit of a timeline, because you have, as I said, a crazy start to stand up. It was almost by accident. Yes. I don't know where to start, because I've got literally 2 pages on how everything's happened. Maybe we can do a bit of a quick summary to get to it. But I think in your mid-20s, roughly, you'd broken up with your fiance, you stopped drinking, and you moved back with your parents, which 3 crazy things happening at once. Where were you at your life, and tell me a little bit more about it?
Well, so I'm trying to get the timeline. Yes. So we did Ronnie John's, which was a sketch show.
Yep.
I ended up getting into the Sydney Uni Arts Review because I did a play with the director. And he's like, hey, we need more women in our uni review. Funny women, would you audition? And I'm like, I don't go to uni. He's like, we'll find a loophole. So I got in. And then there was like a best of show where Heath Franklin, who plays Chopper, and Chris McDonald, who is my now manager, live producer, and best friend, they went around all the universities, and any of the sketches they wanted to use in this best of show, if you were in one of them or if you wrote one of them, you were allowed to audition for their show. So I auditioned, I got into that. Then from there we had like this writing workshop that like Channel 10 was like, we just want to develop some ideas, which is unheard of. And then we got this sketch show a month after we like sort of did our presentation. It was insane. So we did this sketch show called the Ronnie John's Half Hour, and we did 2 seasons of that. And then at the end of that, I still didn't have an agent. None of us did.
And why is that?
There was no, for most of us, there was no real precedent. It was sort of the end of sketch. Like sketch was sort of dying. The 90s were like the heyday of Australian sketch. And then we were sort of the tail end of it. It was us and Skid House and The Wedge.
The glory days.
The glory days. But there was just no agents for us, because that was the only thing that we'd done. So they're like, there isn't enough work for you. We don't know what you are. They didn't know really that I'd come from an acting background. So I became a production manager. Chris McDonald, who I just mentioned, said, I'm going to take Heath Franklin as Chopper. I'm going to do a national tour. Do you want to be a production manager? And I said, I've never been one before. And he's like, I'll train you. And I'm like, okay. So I was Heath's production manager, operated his show, sold merch. I did that for 2 years.
Isn't that, sorry for interjecting, isn't that wild? You come from sketch. You don't know what's out there after. First of all, you've been successful in sketch, and then you're like, what do I do? And then you get something which isn't quite sketch, and you do very well at it. I think you even studied a TAFE course at the time to help with it. I could be getting things.
Oh, I studied music business skills at TAFE, but that was before all of...
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, that was when I was like 18, 19.
So you do the touring with Heath Franklin.
Yeah.
Is that what you're expecting after the sketch, or you're just kind of putting your hand up and being like, I'll do whatever needs?
I'll do whatever. I'm like, I don't have a job. I was waitressing. I'd gone back to help my mate who'd opened a cafe. So I was waitressing. I was helping plan this tour. And I think I had and then I got I got one job, like a TV job with Rebel Wilson. It was called Monster House. It was like a prank show. That got canned. And obviously... I was involved in many shows that got cancelled.
Yeah, I have many questions on that as well.
But I had not done stand-up at this point, but I had stopped drinking. I'm just trying to get the timeline right.
No, I know, because I've got literally a page, but I don't want to just spew the dot points.
Well, it's probably more interesting, to be honest.
No, it's not. Your story told by you is better than me reciting.
Okay, that's what happened. We finished series 2 of Ronnie Johns.
Yep.
Then we'd started a website about a month before the end of Ronnie Johns and started selling posters and T-shirts based on the characters.
Oh, interesting.
That's right. And then Chris was like, McDonald was doing all of the admin. And I said, if you need someone to pack letters or envelopes, I'll come and do that, because I didn't have a job, and being working class was terrified of not working. So he's like, yeah, I'd love that. So I went in, that's when we became friends. Before that, I found him really hard work, and he thought I was a troublemaker. And
it normally goes the other way around. When you work for someone, you hate them and you like them before, whereas you've gone the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he was the executive producer of the show and the head writer. And he just had a very blunt way of giving feedback, which was crushing to a 25-year-old that had never been a writer before. I'd only ever done acting before I did the sketch show, and I only started writing sketches for the uni review. That was the first time I'd ever written. I didn't know that being funny was a job.
Crazy.
It never occurred to me that I could be funny as a job. I thought acting was it. I thought that was it never crossed my mind.
How the times have changed for you.
Yeah, now look at me. I'm hilarious. No. So that finished. I started packing, T-shirts and posters and going to the post office, and my relationship was falling apart. I had stopped drinking because I'd been in therapy for about a year and a half, maybe a year, and the therapist had said, it surprises me the frequency and the quantity with which you drink. And that scared the life out of me because someone had noticed. And so I stopped drinking, and then I had my last drink just before Christmas 2006. And then in January 2007, I had a spiritual epiphany.
Cool.
I don't know if it's a spiritual epiphany or an emotional epiphany, but it was something external where I still remember it. I was walking across the Domain, the park in Sydney, and I had these, I was carrying 2 bags, like green Woolworths bags, and they were full of boxes, and I was walking to the post office, and my head was going back and forth about my relationship. Am I bored with him? Am I bored with myself? Am I bored with the relationship? Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That had been happening for months. And then everything in my brain just went dead quiet. And these words said, "You're leaving him."
Whoa.
And it was like, oh no, I can't take it back. Like, it was just so clear. It was over. There was no catalyst. It was just done.
And you felt it inside? You just like...
Yeah, it was like the door was shut. Like, I couldn't get back in. I would have loved to have got back in, but I couldn't. It was just locked.
That's so... And obviously it's been for the best because you've had some wild shifts and you've met your husband now. But isn't that, everyone has these experiences. We might not be able to hear them or see them or recognize them, but you could have rejected that in whatever it is, could have rejected and gone back and done all this stuff. But you felt like this was really important guidance for you and you followed it, which you've also had in your life a few times as well. But
it felt more than that. Like, I would love to say, I listened to myself, but it was like a non-negotiable. Like, it genuinely felt like the choice was taken away from me. I know that sounds a bit woo-woo, but it was genuinely, if I had a choice, I would have absolutely gone back to that relationship. But it was like there was no way that I could. I don't know how else to explain it.
I think that's brilliant.
I called my friend and she's like, "Come and meet me at this cafe." And I told her, and I said, "I think I'm leaving Matt." And then I poured the milk and it curdled in the tea. And I'm like, "I think it's gone off."
That's also a sign.
Yeah, it was like lots of things were aligning at the time. And she said, "Why don't you come and stay at my house tonight and see if you feel the same way tomorrow?" And I was like, which is a brilliant, very sensible thing to do. And I woke up, I scheduled an emergency therapy session, and then I went home and I told him when he got home from work, and then my friend picked me up, and that was it. Good
for you, because it's very scary, and you were dating for like almost a decade as well. So there's a familiarity, it's important part in your life, and you honoured it.
And so then I went on tour. So the tour started 3 weeks later.
With Heath Franklin?
With Heath Franklin. And so I didn't know... like I say that I got sober, I left my fiance and moved back in with my mum. I actually moved in with my best friend first and lived on her couch out the back, a fold-out couch.
That's a lot better. Then going back to the parents after that long.
Yeah, that was... Well, I did go back to my parents again after that.
Yeah.
But the first, probably 3 or 4 months I was there, and then I was on tour. So when I was back in Sydney, I'd stay on the couch and then go out on tour, and then I come back, and then that was over, and then I had to move back in with mum because my best friend was like, "I'm moving in with my partner."
But I'm your partner now.
Yeah. And I don't know how long I lived there, but I did like part-time waitressing and back in Sydney still. So I think I just had money left over from the tour as well.
This journey... Oh, no, go on.
Then I did another tour with Heath Franklin the following year, and I hadn't performed in 18 months, 2 years. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted. And then I met someone. I promise this is relevant. This is why I don't like telling this story, because everything causes... It's a full domino story. I can't identify any one thing without telling you every detail. So that's why I find it very important.
I appreciate it.
So after the first tour, I went to the Edinburgh Fringe as a punter for the first time, and I was sober, and I was, single for the first time in 8 years. I had only ever slept with my ex-fiance. So it was a very big, scary new world. So I never did all the things that lots of people in their late teens and early 20s do. I didn't sleep with a lot of people or have short-term relationships or live with friends or any of that stuff. So I was 27 when all that started. I met someone at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. We he kind of love-bombed me, and I don't think that he's very well.
Is the best word ever.
Yeah. I don't know if he's clinically been diagnosed as a sociopath, but
it'd be close.
It would be very close. So we ended up getting together, and then we started a relationship. Then I, stayed for 2 weeks longer so I could stay with him in London. I went back to Australia. We stayed in touch. And then he came out and he had been in a play. This is why I'm saying this. He'd been in a play in Edinburgh with Heath and also with Adam Hills. And, you know, Sammy J, there was like a bunch of them. They'd done Break a Morant over there. So when my ex came out to Sydney, Adam was doing one of his live Spicks and Specks shows. And he said, let's go and see the show and we'll catch up with Adam afterwards. So I hadn't met Adam at this stage, and we went to a bar afterwards, and we were all just, you know, messing around and making jokes. And he said, what do you want to drink? Adam was buying around, and I said, I don't drink. I said, I'll get a Coke. And he's like, you can get anything. And I said, I don't drink. And he said, if you can be half this funny, I'll get you on Spicks and Specks, because we don't have enough young, funny women at the moment. And I was like, oh, you know, that's a nice thing to say. And then 2 weeks later, I get a call from the talent producer at Spicks and Specks. And then...
Wild.
Absolutely wild.
It's like a movie.
Yes. And then I did it 7 times, that series, something like that. I did. And it was his wife, Ali, who then girlfriend, but now wife, saw me at Adelaide Fringe when I was still the tour manager, and we're in the artist bar, and she said, hey, I saw you on Spicks and Specks. If you ever want to come and do anything, I do like a cabaret show. I do like a mixed bill. I'm doing it at the Melbourne Comedy Festival. It's called a variety show. She's and I was like, oh yeah, I'd love that. And I hadn't performed. And she said, oh, you don't have to do stand-up. I'm like, oh no, I wasn't going to do stand-up. Like that never crossed my mind that I would do stand-up. So we get to Melbourne Comedy Festival. I'm still operating the shows. And I run into her halfway through the festival, and she goes, hey, do you want to do a spot? Because I only have 1 slot left on the last night. And I was like, yes. And that was like a real fork in the road moment. I didn't know what I was going to do. And then I had this idea that I was going to use these toy tanks that electrocuted each other. They had infrared bullets that you could like zap the other person.
Oh, where'd you find that?
It was actually Geordie Raskopoulos, who was, I think we played it at her house one day. And I was like, oh, I'll get someone out from the audience and I'll ask them trivia questions. And if they get it wrong, I'll shoot them and they'll get zapped. And if they get it right, they can shoot me. I ordered them on the Friday, and they basically got stolen. They arrived. I like buzzed up the postie. I was in an apartment, and I don't know if the postie stole them. I don't know if someone else in the building stole them, but they never made it there. And that was Friday afternoon. The gig was on Sunday. I went to all the toy shops. Nowhere had anything like it. And I was just in like sweats because I haven't performed in years at this stage. And then fortunately, because of my Ronnie Johns days, I kept a notebook. And so I just trawled my notebook thinking, is there anything funny in here that I can use? And before I did my first stand-up spot, Adam was on the bill as well, and Ali was hosting. And I thought...
Ali's the wife, yeah.
Ali's the wife, yeah, Ali McGregor. I thought, you may as well have fun, Felicity, because after this you were going to kill yourself, because this is the worst idea you've ever had. And then I went out there, and I reckon within like a minute of being on stage, I went, oh, this is it for the rest of my life. This is all I'm ever going to do.
This is the craziest, most wonderful story. For me, it's like the universe is working for you. It might sound also woo-woo, because so many things kind of like ticked off. You made a few decisions for your high school, whatever you want to call it. And then even with Adam Hills, you're at a bar.
Yep.
As you probably are aware, you've probably met so many people being like, we should work together, or I've got a role for you.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And it goes nowhere. The actors have told me that they've heard that more than they've got roles. And then for him to actually be like, you're actually really fun. He recognized you at a bar, you just being chill.
I was a girlfriend. I was his friend's girlfriend. You know what I mean? I wasn't a comic. I'd done a sketch show, a very poorly watched sketch show. We like to call them cult figures.
Excellent. Yeah.
As in the figures were low, but we had a cult following. But yeah, I was literally a girlfriend.
And like he didn't, inverted commas, owe you anything. And he just recognizes you and he's like, I want you on the team. And I don't know what you were thinking, But you could have been like, he's not mean anything by this. And then you get that call 2 weeks later and you're like, wow. And Spicks and Specks for the international audience is amazing. It's like probably one of the biggest shows, or definitely, one of the biggest shows by far. That's the best way of saying it. And it would have put you on the
beloved Australian show, I think.
Exactly. That's the best way of, incredible show, puts you on the map, you get known. And also, I think another awareness you realized that you could just be funny. You didn't need to be a specific type of something. You could just be you. And I feel like that's a massive mindset shift as well. I had no idea you could be just funny. I thought that you, like the idea of stand-up terrified me, that I couldn't be a character even if I was being funny, that I had to be me. That felt like, awful. And so that was my first TV appearance. And then when we were back in Adelaide, actually, Adam put on a secret show and I went along with Heath and they were talking about like funny names or something. And I started talking about my mum, because my mum's name is Trevelyan. And I've never heard that name before.
No, you never will again. And he said, what? And I said, yeah, my mum's name's Trevelyan. Her boyfriend's name is Bilson, and my dad's wife's name is Sherston. And he said, what are you talking about? And he's like, do you want to come up on stage? So then I got up on stage. So this was before the Ali gig. I forgot about this. And I just told stories about like my life, that I was living with my mum. That was her name. She had a chicken, a rabbit, and a dog, and they would all like follow each other around the garden. And it was just like, I forgot that was the prefix to it. So Adam and Ali are like personally responsible for my career.
And then there's fork in the road moment. So you do well in Spicks and Specks, and Ali notices you on the show. It's nice that she's watching her husband's show. That's great.
Yeah.
And she offers you the last spots. Yeah. You are by no means in those like last 2 years a performer, and you've just done sketch, I believe. And so for you to say yes, that's what I'm extremely intrigued by. And you said yes again because your props were stolen. You could have just said, no, I'm not doing it. But in like 2-3 days, for inverted commas, an inexperienced performer, you did it. That is terrifying. And you probably thought, I'm not going to do this 100 times, but you did it. And that has changed your entire life, that decision.
Yeah. I was very much, I would say that I was more spiritually in touch and in practice then, that I was very like, I was working very much on intuition. And I think that my life has become very difficult and busy. And so I have not made enough time for that stuff. But when I am like meditating, and I use prayer as a practical tool rather than an act of submission or correlated to a religion. It's the idea that I take the action and then maybe the feelings will catch up.
Yep.
But the act of like praying is like, okay, so an example is when I was living with my mum and I was very sad about my relationship breaking up and I didn't know who I was, and my mum is not particularly good at affection. So how she would help me is she would like make me go and chop wood. And
sorry, I've never heard that in my entire life.
Yeah, that was her way of getting me out of my head.
Yeah, no, it's clever. It's just hilarious.
And that's kind of what prayer is. Whereas it's like spiritual wood chopping, where you're like, I'll say the words, and even if I don't mean it, I've said them, and maybe the practice of saying them again and again. And then sometimes you do feel spiritual and the words mean more, and sometimes you don't. But I suppose it's like a habit. Not a habit of which I'm practicing at the moment, but it can be a habit. And when it is a habit, it's very helpful.
I fully understand. I meditate regularly, and I don't do prayer, but I do affirmations. And so when you're saying it to yourself 100 times, eventually you believe it. Sometimes you have to say it 1,000 times or 10,000 times. And to me, it's just because people can get confused and everyone has to do what works right for them, but it's also just telling you that, you know, you're worthy or you can do this,
Yeah.
or which we all are at some capacity. I know that sounds also woo-woo for some, but from what I've noticed within myself, that it also gets me out of my head, or I can at least, when I go out of my head, I can go back, and it's a great little tool that has worked for me. I might do chopping of the wood. I don't know how to do that, but
it is, I've lots of practical things are like as good as spirituality.
exactly. Like people say, like I physically sit and meditate, but for some people, meditating could be going for a walk or listening to good music.
Or going for a swim more. Like I used to swim a lot as well.
Oh, nice. Something. Can you do that in the UK? Do they have pools?
Yeah, that's all they have, baby. I'm not swimming at their beaches. But their pools are really sad. But yeah, I had to. And then this year, last year, I had to start going to the gym, which I hate, but I just have to do it for mental health stuff. Every time I do it, I'm like, oh, great, I feel better. Great. Thanks for nothing, Jim.
Now I have to go back again.
Yeah.
So going back to this fork in the road moment, do you reflect on this moment? Because not many people you can say like one decision, even though it was a collection of decisions that got you there. But, you know, that one decision, I want to go back. You've lost your toys, your tanks. You are most likely panicking. You've got this show.
Oh, panicking doesn't touch the sides of what I was. I was like, I have to cancel it, but then I couldn't cancel it. It was, I made lots of those decisions in that time. So after that festival, I had a meeting, I think, with an agent. They wanted to have a meeting. And so I flew down. Maybe it was after I was doing another Spicks and Specks later that year.
Yep.
I flew down. I did Spicks and Specks. I went to have a meeting with an agent. I had spoken to the producer of Spicks and Specks that night about this radio idea. Anyway, I walked out of the meeting with my mum came down too. She came down for the taping. And I came out of the meeting with the agent and I said, Mum, I'm going to go, they're going to be my agents and I'm going to move to Melbourne. And she's like, oh, okay. I just knew that's what I was going to do. Oh. So we go back to the Central Coast, which where I am now. And I said, I'm going to, move to Melbourne. I don't know if it was when we got back. It must have been a couple of days after we got back. We'd gone out for the day, probably to the beach. We get home and there's a message on the answering machine from the producer of Spicks and Specks saying, I don't know if you've thought about that radio idea, but we're really serious about it. We want to host for 2 months to host this radio news satire show. I would love for you to be it, but you'd have to live in Melbourne. And I'd already made the decision that I was going to move there. So
just like that.
Yeah. But how is this? So then there was a woman who I met called Alison Bice, who used to be a stand-up. She's a teacher now. And we really got along. And I messaged her. I didn't want to live with like a close friend. I wanted to live with like an acquaintance, so it wasn't weird, or we didn't make it weird. And I said, I want to move to Melbourne, and I know that you are living a little bit far out. Do you want to look for a place together? And she's like, yes. So then I was going to fly down in like 2 weeks' time. And before I flew down, she said, hey, there's another comic who lives out of town and she wants to move in because she works on the radio like Sunday mornings really early. Would you be interested in doing looking for a place that has 3 people? And I was like, yeah, fine. So I didn't know who this person was. We go and we look at a couple of different places. Then we picked a place. I moved 2 weeks later, I think I moved in. Wow. I moved everything down, maybe a month later. That person was Celia Pacquola.
Oh.
And then it turns out we move in together. The radio job was starting in 2 weeks' time or something after we move in, and it turns out that she's the other panellist.
That is wild.
Yeah, and then Seals and I lived together for like 5 years, 3.5 years or something. I was there for 5 years. She moved to the UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to know about your intuition. You said that you're more tapped in at that start. So were you just more in the flow? What was kind of the mentality there? Because that is crazy.
Yeah, crazy. I think that I didn't have anything to lose because I'd lost it all. I was like, I've lost my fiance. I don't have a house. I don't have a career. I don't have, all I have is this practice, you know? And then also the idea of people not laughing, I'm like, if that's the worst thing I've got to worry about, who cares? Like, I can do that. I've just lost everything. I don't care if you don't laugh. Like, that's not that I don't care, but it's like, that's in the grand scheme of things, what does that mean? And I was just so fearless then. And also, I reckon for the next like 4 or 5 years, I did lots of things, including moving to the UK, with the idea that that phrase, things don't happen to you, they happen for you.
Yep.
So I was very good at sort of processing hardship or disappointments into motivation, or having full acceptance that that was supposed to happen and that the right thing will happen. And, you know, the other phrase is things that are for you won't go by you.
Yes.
And then I moved to the UK, and then I reckon I was there for 2 years, and I went, oh, I'm sick of being humble. I'm sick of accepting this. I am sad, jealous, lonely, self-piteous, and I'm going to lean into that because it hasn't been working. And then I had a couple of really difficult years, really, really difficult years.
And then what got you out of those years?
I think that I think I probably tried after about a year to get out, and I couldn't because I was in the practice of self-pity.
Yeah, I know.
And yeah, I also found, like, you know, the connection that I had, or the intuition stuff that I had in Australia, I found it difficult in the UK, and I still find it difficult because I don't know how to refill myself in the UK. So in Australia, I can eat really good food, I can go to the beach, and I'm just like, there's nowhere that I'm happier than when I'm in the water. When I'm in the ocean, I'm like, that's the happiest I will ever feel. Or not even the happiest, it's the most complete I ever feel.
Oh, that's amazing. You're coming back. I'm sorry. I'm bringing your mother-in-law. We'll get a nice place in Melbourne or Sydney, or both.
Yeah. I do get that from work. I get real joy from work. But when that's all you're getting joy from, of course I get joy from my beautiful angel son. But it's too much pressure to expect that of a 4-year-old. They cannot be your only source of joy. It's very unhealthy.
Yeah.
So it is a lot more work to feel rejuvenated in the UK when there are so many things that erode me. So the short days, the long nights, the grey blanket of sky, that you can go 5 days without seeing any blue sky at all.
Yeah, because it's underrated how much I have, like, strong mental health for various reasons. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean I'm perfect. There's ups and downs, but I just say that because I never experienced when I went to London, for example, and this is for me, this is not for everyone. When I went to London for a month and I went in winter, I was like, what is happening to me? Mm-hmm. I have not seen the blue sky, and it actually, for me, impacted me. And that's not to say that it should impact anyone else. Maybe there's a framework to work by or whatever, but it impacted me. So
it's oppressive.
Yeah.
So that's what I really struggle with over there. And also being away from, like, my sister, who's my best friend, that's who I'm staying with at the moment. Like, she's just a plug. Like, she's just a socket. When we're with each other, there's a safety, a comfort, a joy. We think very similarly. We love each other's company. My niece, who I love dearly, like, all of that stuff that's always been my foundation, I don't live near anymore.
What has worked, besides from the career, what has helped you mentally in London? Because, you've got your family, you've got your peers. I'm sure there are other aspects that you've also tapped into as well. I don't want anyone from London to be like, the whole country's going to move because of this conversation.
As I said, I really struggle with it. Cold water swimming.
Ooh.
Cold
Do you
water
do cold-
swimming. Yeah, it's the
Ice baths?
only shortcut. It's the only shortcut to my mental health that has ever worked. So you know how everyone's like, well, if I just do this, I'll get a little hit. But there's usually a bad consequence that comes with that short-term
Yeah.
hit.
Drugs,
Cold
alcohol,
water
sugar.
swimming. Yeah, exactly. So I don't drink. I don't take drugs. I eat sugar, like sugary stuff. I absolutely will not take that out of my diet. I cannot take more joy out of my diet in the UK. I cannot take more joy out of my life.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, so I going dancing really helps.
Oh.
Dancing really helps when I go out, and also when I spend time with my friends. So the last year I came out to film The Office, and then when I went back, I need to.
Where was it filmed?
It was filmed last year in Sydney.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And I got back and I went, I need to radically change how often I am seeing and contacting my friends, because I got into a bit of a self-pity thing of like, oh, people don't contact me, they don't want to be friends with me. And I'm like, even if that's the case, that is not going to work for you. You need to like triple down on how much you are booking things in. You've got to book things in advance, play dates for your son. Like you just got to connect, because I was so happy while I was here filming.
That's
every
a great,
day.
that is a great, I want to talk about The Office, but that's a great tool that you've realized from coming back here of what you can apply there. I love that. And that's getting
yes, but that was, it's just when you grow up somewhere. You know, I lived in Australia till I was 32. I had 32 years of friendship, connections, experiences, memories, understanding. And you go to a new country, and even though it's England and even though it's in English, like there are all these acronyms that you don't know, because you don't know what to Google. Like when we had a baby and my husband would say, oh, you just look it up on the NHS website. And my first thought was like, that's just a website. Why would, this is stuff about our kid. This is medical stuff. And then I went to the website and went, oh, this is actually comprehensive medical advice. What else can I use an example of? Just like what is road tax? What? So you pay road tax in the UK. When you have a car, you pay a monthly, you can pay a year, you can pay it in you can pay it in bulk, one payment, or you can pay it over the year. But you pay road tax for having a car. You pay council tax, which is like rates if you rent. You pay the rates for the owner. All of this stuff that you're like, why aren't we rioting?
Yeah, well, we've also got our problems here, but that's bonkers.
Obviously, we've got our problems.
That one scares me. Those. Well, you're given a lot of tangible skills as well. You mentioned The Office, and this actually comes back to what we were saying before, where you've done pilot season before, you've auditioned plenty of times, and as you know better than anyone, you audition for 1,000 jobs and you get the one job. And I heard you in another podcast say that you didn't get many roles because you wanted them so bad. So I'm wondering what the shift was to now get The Office Australia, which is you're the lead of a sitcom, which is a dream come true for what I've heard you say. So that's a big shift as well.
When I started doing stand-up, I wasn't desperate about auditions, because all of a sudden I'm not waiting for anyone else. I'm the writer of the show. I'm the director of the performance. I am the performer. I can write it that day and I can practice it that night on stage in front of an audience. I'm not waiting for a play to be written. I'm not waiting for a director to hire a space. I'm not waiting for other actors to be cast. It's immediate. Stand-up is very self-sufficient. And so when I started doing stand-up also, it made me 1,000 times better of an actor. Like, I'm such a better actor for doing stand-up because
is it also confidence?
there's just an added layer of when I read a script, I know I instinctively want to make something funny. So even if it's a sad character, if it's a drama, I can see where the writer has intended humour, where there's lots of actors who are extraordinary actors, dramatic actors, but they don't know how to make something funny. And it's a real skill. And so if you can do both, then you have a much more textured character and a much more textured experience.
That's a brilliant take. And also, it's so fascinating because when you really want something, you then work on the other thing, which is stand up. That builds this like confidence within yourself, realizing that you're okay. You don't come in like, I'm not saying that you did this, reeking of desperation. You can just go in probably more of your flow state compared to previous times. And then you get the office. So I assume that there were quite a few auditions in the process. What was the kind of like lead up to getting the role?
It was a very, very long process.
Yeah,
it was a very long process. Not like heaps and heaps of auditions. There was just like, like they changed, there was a direction change of the show, or like they just wanted to get it right. So they took a long time writing it. And yeah, because of COVID, during COVID, I did all of my self-tapes. Like you do it, all of them were self-tapes. There's no in-person auditions. And then when you have a kid and you're doing a self-tape, it takes a lot of the obsession away from it, because you film it, you send it off, and then you've got to take your kid to daycare. You've got to make him dinner. You're exhausted, all of that stuff. And then I'm gigging, and there's so much more going on. Having said that, that was something that I was trying not to be excited about.
Yeah. And then when you got the call that you got it, what was that like?
Wild. I was going to do a COVID test in Wellington, New Zealand. I was working on a different TV show, which I don't know when that's coming out either.
Which one's that one?
It is called Time Bandits, and Jermaine Clement from Flight of the Conchords and Ian Morris from Inbetweeners are showrunners, and then Taika Waititi directed 2 episodes, and then he's in it as well. Yeah. So we filmed that in Wellington. And I thought that was my dream job. Like there was one scene, the first day of filming, second day of filming, me and the guy, James Dryden, who plays my husband in the show, we were doing our close-ups, and because we were filming with a kid who's the main character, he had to go and do his school. So we did the close-ups of just us in the end. And it was the cameraman, sound guy, Taika behind the camera, and then Jermaine there with a script on the other side of the camera. And we just sat there for like an hour. They would feed us different lines. Why don't you try this? Do you want to improv this line? And I remember Taika going, just use me as an eye line. And I'm going, what's happening? I'm looking at Taika Waititi while I improvise comedy in front of Jermaine Clement.
I've never been more positively jealous of someone. Congratulations to you. Yeah. That is wild. And you thought that was your dream, and now you get the office.
Yeah.
Is it hard to, I'm not sure the right word is appreciate, because it is an out, but you understand like what the office, there's a lot of attention that's going to be received. So what's kind of like, I would be like quite ungrounded, like, oh my God, when's it coming out? I'm so excited. But then there's also nerves. Will people like it? What's going to happen? How do you kind of like ground yourself? Because you know something big's about to happen, even though it's happened, but it hasn't been shown yet.
Know. I don't know that something big is about to happen. It'll come out, but I don't know if you remember, the Rings of Power, the Lord of the Rings TV show.
Yep. People
watched it, and then they didn't talk about it, or like these big shows that have months and months of promo, and then people watch the first episode and then they don't watch anymore. Or people watch it, love it, and forget about it. There's so much TV being made. I think that the publicity in the lead up will be really big and really hectic. I don't know that, but I assume that. And then, the first and second episode, there'll be, I reckon, a lot of pressure. I would love to think that I'd go off social media. I won't, because I don't do things that are good for me.
Well, that will agree to disagree. You've given 200 tools that go on.
But yeah, I think that because I'm older and I'm not 20, I don't have this is going to make me a rock star mentality about it. I would love for it to be very successful because I would love to have a regular income doing my dream job. That is what I would really love. I have no interest in being famous. I'm interested in being successful. I'm interested in making things that make me really happy, which then in turn means that people will come and see me on live tours.
Brilliantly said. You did a lot better than me. Like, I also meant like big in terms of this is a big achievement for you, regardless of what happens. You know, you put in the work and a great outcome's happened. Before we go, you've got a new show that's coming out for a little while, and I think it's starting tonight, but this won't be out tonight. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, what's different about this show is it's actually part of a bigger show that I'm not touring here. So initially, I had this idea that I would do 1 hour on pregnancy, a 1 hour show on pregnancy, 1 hour show on the birth, and then 1 hour show on having a newborn. And I'd do 3 different shows on different nights, and then on the last night, I'd do all 3 shows together. And so that was my concept. And then about a year ago, I did Just for Laughs in London. And I thought, I wonder if I melded the shows together, if I could do like a 2-hour show, like an abridged show. And that's what I ended up doing. And it was like an hour, then there was an interval, and then I did the other hour. And so that's the show that I'm starting to tour in July in the UK. I'm starting it in London. So the show that I'm doing out here is an hour of that, but all just the stand-up bits, all the funny, no story, no theme, no arc, no lessons, no poignancy, balls to the wall jokes.
It's very funny. And what did you say it was called?
I'm Exhausting.
And where are you doing the shows?
I am doing the shows at the Central Coast, Adelaide Fringe Festival, Canberra Comedy Festival, Gold Coast Laughs Festival, Hobart Comedy Festival, Melbourne International Comedy Festival, Sydney Comedy Festival, Perth Comedy Festival, and Brisbane Comedy Festival.
Holy moly, everywhere. So no one has an excuse not to see it for the Australian listeners.
Exactly.
I will put it in the episode notes below the tour date so people can check it out. Before we go, we're going to do an extremely quick rapid fire segment. So the first thing that springs to mind, what are you most proud of?
My son.
What did you learn from your doco series, and what was it called?
Oh, it was called Felicity's Mental Mission, and what I learned was you can't win every battle, and that name was one of the battles.
Why do you talk about your mental health?
Because I know it intimately enough to make jokes about it.
And have you found that it's helped other people?
Surprisingly, yes, and lots.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I won't comment on them. Next big dream or goal?
I just want to stay employed.
Any advice you want to give to people who want to try something different or new, but perhaps a bit fearful of doing so?
The definition of bravery is feeling the fear and doing it anyway.
That's probably gonna be the promo, the start of the podcast. That was great. Or which one? What would you do if you knew you could not fail?
Oh, what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? That's a great question. That's blown my mind. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know what I would. I think that I try most things anyway, but that's really that's a really lovely way to think. Like, imagine my brain if I wasn't afraid of failing. Like, my brain just went, oh.
Something to think about. Last question before I ask how people can follow you and keep up to date with you. What is the one question I should have asked you?
Can I give you $1 million?
And what's it's the second question I should have asked you? You can give it to me. I can return it. I can return most of it.
I don't think about what people should or shouldn't ask me. It's an old controlling behavior that I've tried to let go of.
Oh, I love that. That's the best response that we've had. Cool. You are amazing. We've said your tour dates. When does The Office come out, if I haven't asked that already? And how can people follow you and all of that cool stuff?
The Office will come out this year sometime. I don't know when.
Have you seen it?
No.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Is that wild?
Yep.
Yep, I have not seen it. I don't know if they've finished editing everything yet, but I've seen snippets when we've had to do ADR. For people that don't know what ADR is where you have to go back into a recording studio, watch little snippets of scenes that either the voice was muffled or there was a microphone issue, or they need you to say something while the camera is on someone else to help the storyline or the plot.
Nice.
It's a little feeling.
And how else can people follow you? You've got a website, Instagram, X,
yep.
Facebook.
Website is felicityward.com. Instagram, Facebook, X is all at Felicity Ward. TikTok, I think, is Felicity J Ward.
I'll find it.
And YouTube is a very poorly attended. I have some of my shorts on there, some of the clips.
Amazing. Those will all be in the episode notes. People can check it out. Thank you so much. I love your mentality. You're a very uplifting, empowering lady. This was great. And yeah, very excited for your massive tour and the rest of your trip.
Thanks, mate. When does this come out?
That, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll try and get it out in the next 2 weeks.
Great.
Perfect. Okay. This is great. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the trip.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
I love Felicity's story on how she met Adam Hills in a pub and how she was just being herself and not anyone else. So often we can spend time developing personas of who we think others want us to be. We forget that we are the most powerful versions of ourselves by being our authentic selves. By Felicity embracing herself and just being in the flow of life, she was able to take advantage of the beauty this world has to offer and thus received a life-changing opportunity. So I'll leave you with this epic quote. You change the world by being yourself. Yoko Ono. Thank you for listening to the Funny and Failure podcast, exploring the deeper side of comedy.